Hey everybody, it's Phil Struzzo from Select Software Reviews. I'm back with another conversation with somebody from our expert council to shed some light today, specifically talking about the future of HR tech. I'm joined today with Ed Pederson. He is the VP of Product at Kelly. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So Ed, I heard that you have lived in many countries. I always like to kick things off with something a little bit more personal. Can you tell us a little bit about this sort of fun fact about you?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to live in multiple countries, but like I think the last time I totaled it up, I've worked in close to 45 different countries across the world. And probably the most interesting work experience was I was doing an assignment with John Deere that sent me to Siberia in December. So
Oh my gosh.
not one I'm looking to replicate, but it was definitely a memorable experience for me.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely brutal. What's it like -30 on average every day or something?
It was the coldest I've ever been, for sure.
Wow. Yeah. Well, sounds like a lot of fun. Definitely good experiences. I'm sure you get a lot of awesome stories. Just for context, do you mind kind of giving folks a little bit of background on where you've been in your career and then what you do today at Kelly?
Yeah, you bet. My career actually started out in the Midwest of the United States. I worked for a company called John Deere, which I think is a pretty well recognized brand name. I spent 17 years with that company, had a wonderful career in all manners of procurement. I did everything from your basic buying to supply the factories with the parts that they needed to produce the different pieces of equipment, be it construction or agricultural equipment. Grew up through the ranks. I did some supplier development where I'd go help companies with their quality, delivery, cost issues, et cetera. Went into strategic sourcing on the current product side for the physical parts, again, that went into our factories. I did new product development where we introduced a new combine on a global scale across 3 or 4 different factories around the world, which was really one of my major positions that took me into those 45 different countries. And then the last position that I had there was I was managing all of the professional services spend across the globe, which was about $2 billion in spend, ranged in everything from IT to engineering services, marketing, HR, anything that was kind of manpower generated. I had about a bit of a life change personally, where my family chose to move to the Washington, D.C. area, which is where we're at now. And unfortunately, John Deere does not have a factory or an office location there. So that's where I kind of bifurcated my career and went a completely different route and came over to Kelly. And so I've had a number of different roles. The first one was to manage their services procurement arena. And they said, hey, turn our practice into something you would have wanted to buy at John Deere. So I spent a couple of years doing that, but really kind of on the operation side of the business, and then grew up into essentially what my role is now, which manages both the product development aspect for Kelly, which is all the new exciting things that we want to do with our company for this year and out to 5-10 years down the road. But I also do manage the product management function, which is all of the current stuff. So any sort of incremental feature adds, making sure that our marketing materials is fresh, that we're putting out thought leadership across our current products, et cetera, and just making sure that from a current perspective, that's all syncing as well. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Nice. That's awesome. I think it's a pretty interesting journey. I love it when people have backgrounds that are not, I've been doing the same thing for 20 years, because I think that you bring a lot of different perspectives and experiences, obviously, to the table. And if you're able in your career to adapt to the new role, the new industry, I find that folks just are, having that diversity of experience, I guess, it can be really impactful. I'm excited about this conversation because we are always looking at sort of what's the next thing in HR tech. And I guess before we get to the next thing, I'm curious about, from your perspective, the current state of the world, and what are like the best practice companies out there leveraging for their HR tech stacks? Like what sort of technologies or processes are those best in class companies adopting?
Yeah, so I would say what I see, and it really is different for a lot of the companies as you go around the world, and it all depends upon kind of where they're at in their journey, and what they should focus on is what's going to take them to that next step in their journey and what have you. But the more progressive ones are looking at things from a technology perspective of, one, how do they simplify their technology architecture that they have? They've got so many different options available to them. You look in the HR tech space and there's literally thousands of different providers all doing like, one little niche here or one little niche there. And they're always struggling with, how does that integrate with my total picture? Am I going to break something by, introducing this piece of technology here and what have you? And so really kind of having a clear path of what do they want to do from a company and a culture perspective that's going to really kind of move the needle forward for them. And for most companies, what they've got their sights set on is a concept called total talent management. It's probably one of the larger topics within our industry, but it's really, looking across the globe of how they can get greater visibility into all the different labor channels and what have you. And then once they have that visibility, how do they optimize and turn the knobs and pull the levers and what have you to get into a full strategic workforce plan that leverages the best of their full-time labor, their contingent and temporary labor, their contractors that they go through with like Accenture and Capgemini and those sorts of folks. And then the really progressive ones are starting to get into robotic labor. What does that mean from an RPA standpoint? Not necessarily, having physical robots or anything like that if you're in a manufacturing section, but how do you become quicker, faster, better, and evolve your job descriptions into something new that leverages the best of that RPA landscape?
Yeah, I think the concept of total talent management is pretty interesting, especially for a diverse global enterprise that has lots of different types of labor and tasks to be done in lots of different countries. I'm kind of curious about like the specific tactics that you see just driving efficiency, maybe specifically in the talent acquisition funnel, whether that's on the sourcing side or assessments or moving people through the platform, employer branding, really anything that you've seen that just is sort of like made you stop and think like, oh yeah, like that is a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, so there's probably a couple that I can speak to that come right to the top of mind. One is, most, especially when you look at larger organizations, most of those companies have a very kind of complicated supply chains to fulfill their needs, whether it's full-time labor, whether it's contingent or even contractor. When I was at John Deere, I managed a supply base of over 8,000 suppliers for that $2 billion in spend, and it's very difficult with a small team to really kind of fully optimize and look across that. So in the contingent labor space, chances are if they're not employing a managed service provider, they've got hundreds of different providers that can bring, all the different pieces of niche talent that they need to fulfill the roles that they have. And even some of that translates into the full-time space of, which agencies can they use to bring that in. So having a integrated technology stack that really has an eye towards how do you optimally design your flows to take advantage of those efficiencies is kind of key. It's use of RPA, bots and things that can do your sourcing and screening function, where they can go out and based on, certain criteria and what have you, they can be out searching for candidates out in the, the internet, the LinkedIn, the Indeeds and what have you. And then when you as a recruiter wake up in the morning, you've got a stack of candidates that are pseudo pre-vetted that, really kind of simplifies your opportunities there. Scheduling with candidates is can be a nightmare. Instead of trying to call up, the candidate and say, hey, when's your availability? And then you call the hiring manager and say, what's your availability, and making that work. Employing technologies like Calendly to really kind of streamline that so that people can just opt in and self-select, and it doesn't take, a lot of human interaction. So that is definitely one efficiency play. But when it comes to the supply chain aspect of it, what we see more and more customers migrating towards, and more solutions getting better and better at, is simplifying the supply chain. There's a concept around talent community building, or direct sourcing is a name in the contingent space and what have you. But it's really kind of developing for yourself a affinitized pool of individuals that really want to work for your company, that can either go into full-time roles or they can go into contingent roles. It's typically focused around, particular skill sets and what have you, but you can do some pre-vetting, you can nurture them, and you can kind of have them more warm, such that when you do have a need, it's a much faster process to roll them into the interviewing and get them onboarded, and tend to a bit more cost effective for companies as well. So those are probably just a couple of things that come to mind.
That's great. And do you have any recommendations for nurturing specifically? I feel like this has sort of been one of these concepts that a lot of TA folks have talked about for a long time. Obviously, marketing's pretty darn good at it on the customer acquisition side of things. Are there any best practices there? Are we developing a newsletter, or are we, talking to people on a regular basis?
Well, there's some really cool technology out there that really kind of helps that whole conversation along. And to answer the first part of your question, I do highly suggest that you take a marketing approach to it. It's people that are creatively minded that can help create, visually appealing newsletters or infographics, or, the more engaged materials are video based and what have you, that people are actually going to click on, review it, and then interact with you. Maybe you want them to actually apply for a job, or, update their status or something of that nature. And you really need to have that marketing mindset. And when we do talent community nurturing, we actually employ those types of individuals to do that for us. But on the technology side, what's really slick is that as you're starting to learn the space, and you're, trying maybe a newsletter here or a blog there or a video here, the technology will actually help you understand what do talent really interact with. What percentage actually open the email if it comes through an email or a text message. What percentage actually watch your video all the way through. How do they scroll all the way to the bottom and read everything on that? Do they click on that link that you wanted them to go interact with another tool, or download an app, or, something of that nature? So definitely use that technology to your advantage, that you can learn how your talent really like to be communicated to, and what do they actually really react to.
Yeah, that's cool. It's like lead scoring essentially. And so you're understanding what content's resonating, but also who to actually focus on when you're looking to open and close new recs.
Yeah.
Are there any interesting ways that folks are using data now that maybe is somewhat novel, or maybe you just see, best practice, like that top 5% of companies leveraging data in specific ways that is really impactful?
Yeah, data is kind of like the new holy grail that everybody's really trying to figure out. We've taken a couple runs at it in our company, and it's really like, hey, customers, they want to understand these insights, and they want to have it at their fingertips, and they want to go through and be able to manipulate graphs and charts and what have you to see, what sort of stories exist out there, which is really good. In a sales pitch, it's differentiating and what have you. But what you find is that, for as exciting as that is for most individuals don't have the time to go out there and see the stories that they want to see, or manipulate the charts into the insights that they really want. And they rely on their third-party vendors to say, hey, you tell me, and you show me what the story is, and that sort of thing. So where I see kind of data going in some of the more progressives is instead of having to go out to kind of like a disparate system, log into it, try to mine through all the graphs and charts yourselves and what have you, that you see more progressive companies that are integrating that into the existing experience that they already have. So, most individuals, they're, in their email system, or they're on Internet Explorer or Chrome or Firefox or what have you. And as you're going through those environments that you're interacting with on a daily basis, you might say, I need an engineer. And you've got engineer that you've searched for on your screen, and you can hover over the word engineer, and it says, well, there's 20,000 engineers with these sorts of qualifications within a 10-mile radius of me, and the average pay rate or the average salary is this. So it's kind of more instant and integrated insights from the data side than anything.
Got it. Yeah, I feel like data, it's sort of like the promised land that is really hard to actually find and utilize. But the few companies who do have sophisticated teams to sort of, aggregate and analyze and then action on the data are reaping the benefits when they look at, time to fill or cost per hire, et cetera.
Right.
I'm wondering, you mentioned that you're focused also on sort of like the next 5 to 10 years of where, Kelly is going to go from a product perspective, operationally. What are your predictions on how the TA tech world will change over that time horizon? Like, what do you think the world's going to look like in 2030 or 2025?
Yeah, like how I'd best categorize that would be, if you look as we are all kind of consumers of, various, tangible goods and what have you, and even, services and whatnot in our daily lives, the experience that we all have to go out to like an Amazon.com, where I don't need to be trained on how to use Amazon.com. For sure, my 14-year-old daughter doesn't need to be trained. She figured that out pretty well. Is that like that sort of experience that we've all come to enjoy in our daily lives needs to translate into this HR, talent acquisition, staffing industry in a big way. And we see a lot of the new entrant technology players really kind of pushing the envelope for that from a user experience level that allows you to do more with less training, and in a, depends upon your culture and what you're willing to digest and what have you, but in a more humanless sort of setting, such that, it might be in the future that instead of calling up my recruiter and saying, hey, I've got an opening, or emailing them or chatting with them in instant message or something like that, it's going to be such a cohesive environment that you can almost do it self-service, and that you don't ever interact with the traditional people that, our structure is set up around, and that there's the automation and the secret sauce, behind the scenes that brings you the best available candidates, and that those candidates have opted in, they've been pre-vetted, the credentials that they have in their resume are validated so that you can trust it, as opposed to, perhaps, some of the over embellished resumes that you may or may not see. All of that kind of comes together in a very solid kind of consumerism sort of environment. And the challenge for the industry that we're in is that we've had, so much like legacy technology out there, that has been evolving along the way. But it is going to, like, I feel like we're at this precipice of some major disruption that's really going to, leave some of those legacy technologies in the past, and really kind of leapfrog us forward into what we all experience and enjoy in our personal lives. It's like constantly frustrating. You go into like any sort of, Fortune 500 company, and they probably have some, antiquated user environment from an ERP setting where you have to like, type /MDO4 go to here, like that sort of environment, to the future where it's just like you go into this really nice, visually pleasing web page, or you're on your phone, or you're talking to some sort of voice assistant, and you can get your work done in a much more effective way.
Yeah, let the robots help you out, I guess, be more efficient. I think that's like the future from my perspective as well. I've sort of, after I asked you the question, I was kind of like, what do I think's, going to happen in 5 or 10 years? And it's, software and mobile technology have allowed us to be much more efficient, in some ways they've sort of like disrupted and monopolized our attention to a large extent as well. But I think we'll get better at clawing that back a bit and allowing the robots to do what the robots are good at and help us spend time what the humans need to do, which is to spend more time with candidates in the interview process and on onboarding and, all these things where I don't think software is going to replace us anytime soon. And when it does, we'll all be super rich living on Mars. So it doesn't matter. Ed, I want to just thank you for, your time and your insights and sort of sharing your perspective, which I think is a very unique one in this world of HR technology.
Yeah, you bet. I appreciate the time and would love to chat with you again in the future.
Awesome. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Once again, Phil Strazul with Select Software Reviews, the #1 place out there to find out about HR tech. What are the hot tools, how to buy it, all that good stuff you need to be successful. Thanks again.